Hey everyone, welcome back to another tutorial on Spring Boot. Today I'm going to show you how to serve static resources from your Spring Boot application. The static resource can be some files, some public files you want to serve with or without authorization. Okay, so let's get started. I'm creating a new project, new Spring Boot project for this purpose. My language is Java. Project build tool is Maven using the latest stable Spring version. Group is group ID is com.example. Artifact ID is static resource server. Let's put a hyphen so it is better readable. Static resource server. My packaging is jar and the version of Java is 2x1 LTS. And let's add Spring Web dependency, so that we have the server and all necessary thing. Clicking on generate and saving the zip file on my repositories folder. And once the repository is downloaded, let's extract it. And let's now open my IntelliJ. Open the new boilerplate project I have just downloaded. Since it is first time loading, it is taking some time to resolve the dependencies, and it is a first time thing. So now IntelliJ loaded everything and everything is good to go. As you can see, we have our main application starting point. If I run the server, it will start on localhost 8080. As you can see, the server is started. So let's now dive into our topic today, serving static resource. Before that, you have to understand the concept of class path and how if Spring Boot application is packaged and deployed on the server. So when you build your project with Maven, there is a folder in the target, and this folder contain a jar file, and that jar file actually get deployed in the server. And that jar file is very old and classic thing in Java application and have a long history. Let's not dive into that. So to serve static resources from your Spring Boot application, by default it is configured, and everything you put inside this static folder that will be served from your application. So let's try that out first. I'm going to pexels.com, downloading a photo, saving it on the resources folders static folder, naming the file as test.jpg. Now let's restart our server and try to access that image from our browser. So now the server is running on localhost 8080. Let's go to localhost, and the port is 8080 and /is, and the path for static resource is let's try to directly access the folder test.jpg. Yeah, we can directly access the image from our server, just putting it inside the static folder. So this way, when you need to serve some static resource like CSS file, JavaScript file, when you are developing a monolith application in Spring, this can come in handy. You can just put your public resources here, and frontend can access that. So let's create a different folder called public and copy this image and paste it to public folder and name it test public.jpg. So now my public folder have a file called test_public, and let's restart our server. Now let's go to our server and test_public, since it is in public folder, and boom, we can see that this image is served from the public folder, right? So this is not happening randomly. Spring Boot have well configuration for this. That's why it is happening. What about a folder called resources under the folder resources, right? So let's create a new folder called resources inside this and just see if it works. New folder resources, and copying this file and pasting it inside the resources and naming it test_resources. And now In the resources folder, we have test_resources.jpg. Copy the file name and let's go back to our server and type this. So it is not working without restarting the server. Let's restart and see if it works. Yeah, if I create a new folder called resources, inside the folder resources and put some file there, those file can be accessed with the file name just after the context path of my application. So this is interesting, right? Public folder, resources folder, static folder, all folder are serving the static resources. So whatever folder I create and put file, everything seems to be working. Let's create a new folder inside our class path resources folder called META-INF and create a new folder here called resources and put a new file inside this META-INF dot resources. So this resources folder is actually inside this META-INF folder, and let's copy the let's rename this file as test resources underscore meta so that we can differentiate. And let's restart our server and see if this one works or not. Test resources underscore meta. Yes, it is still working. Interesting, right? So in a Spring Boot application, in Spring Boot 3, if you put your file under static, public, if you have actually 4 different way to serve static resources, and each one have a valid reason, and I'll explain if this video tutorial allows. I'll explain one by one. So you can create a new folder called static and serve the resources from this folder without any configuration. We can create a folder called public, and we can create a folder called resources, and we can create a folder called META-INF and create a resources folder inside that, and that folder can also serve static resources. So when we build a jar file is nothing but a archive type, like you have used 7-zip or jar file. Jar file is kind of that. It just packages all the Java bytecodes in a standard structure for Java. So META-INF folder is a folder from where the classes are served in Spring Boot jar. You can deep dive into this jar structure if you want to learn more. So we have learned how we can serve static resources from our application, from our resource folder in different ways. The standard approach would be serving from public folder for some public resources, like you have a template for PDF or how to document or how to HTML, or you can use the static folder. Okay, these two approaches recommended. Now imagine a scenario, you have a totally different storage like Amazon S3 bucket or your own server where the files are served. You need to publicly serve those files from your Spring Boot application. In that case, we need to override some default Spring Boot configuration. Okay, so that way you can define a specific local or remote directory from where Spring Boot will serve the files. So for that, let's create a new package here, config, and inside this configuration, I can create a new class called static file service config created a new static file service config and marking this class as Spring configuration. This class has to implement web MVC configurer. This is a servlet configuration for Spring framework for your Tomcat server, and inside this, let's override this method. Okay, this one is the method which serves the location for serving static resources. Okay, so let's override this method here. Let's override this method here, and this method have a parameter called ResourceHandler registry, and I can add new ResourceHandler for URL pattern and serve the resource location. So this is showing the static, the default value. If I am using Linux, then I can use the path of my server, like here this is the root slash, this is the base directory of Linux, and opt, then the folder from where I want to serve the resources. So since I'm on Windows, I have to type something called this, something like this. If I have a D drive, then tree:/static and this. So if I configure this, then everything inside the static folder of D drive can be accessed with localhost/static/ the name of the file inside this d/static folder. So if the d/static folder have a file called test.jpg, I can access that file from localhost/static/test.jpg. This is how it works. But what if you want to serve from your AWS S3 bucket that is in a remote server, right? So your files have to be public in the S3 bucket. Then you can also configure that the base directory for your public files in S3 here, and you can serve your static resources from your cloud through Spring Boot application. So I hope you got the idea how to serve static resources from your Spring Boot application. There can be a different approach. If you are using Spring security, then you have to whitelist those URLs. Like if you have Spring security configured and you want to serve your own public files like this, then you have to whitelist this static/starter2, because by default Spring security will require authentication and authorization for all URL. And beware of the file : directory here. This file have some meaning. This can be some other things too, right? It supports some other protocol too. So I hope you got the idea. Let me know how you serve static resources from your application. By the way, this full approach is for public static resources. If your resources requires authorization, that can also be served from your controller, and at that case you have to have authentication configured, like you can use the session or JWT token and authorize the user, and then you can serve. So I hope you learned something out of this video today for Spring, and I hope you found this 4 kind of approach interesting in Spring Boot. Okay, I think that's it for this tutorial. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed watching my content, and I'll see you in the next tutorial on Spring with some interesting stuff. So until next time, happy coding.